It was a quiet night when I finally picked up the phone. The city outside my window was alive. Cars passing, people laughing somewhere below, a siren in the distance. But inside my small apartment, it felt like another world. 10 years had passed since I last heard my mother's voice. 10 years of silence. 10 years of pretending that I was fine. I had told myself that I didn't need anyone, that I was grown, independent, free. But that night, as I sat by the window with the rain tapping softly on the glass, I realized how hollow that freedom felt. I had built a life far away from home, a job, a small circle of friends, a tidy apartment with nothing out of place. Everything looked right on the outside. But when the day ended and the world went quiet, I always felt that same ache, the kind that begins somewhere deep inside the chest and spreads like cold water. That night, I couldn't sleep. Something about the rain reminded me of home, of the tin roof above my old room, of how my mother used to hum softly while cooking, and how the smell of her tea would drift through the hallway. I hadn't thought about that in years, or maybe I had, but I tried not to. My phone lay on the table. The screen lit up every few minutes with meaningless notifications. I stared at it for a long time before I finally unlocked it. My hands were trembling. I scrolled through my contacts until I found her name. Amma. The name looked unfamiliar, like a photograph left too long in the sun. I had changed phones so many times, but I could never bring myself to delete that name. I don't know what made me press call. Maybe it was loneliness. Maybe it was guilt. Or maybe it was just time. Time finally catching up with me. The ringtone echoed in my ears, long and uncertain. I thought she wouldn't pick up, that she'd moved on with her life, the way I had tried to. Then, after a few rings, I heard a sound I hadn't heard in a decade. Her voice. Hello? It was soft, unsure, and in that one word the years disappeared. I wanted to say her name, but my throat tightened. My breath caught. For a moment I couldn't speak at all. I just sat there, tears filling my eyes, listening to her breathe on the other end of the line. And then somehow I whispered, "It's me, Amma." There was silence. A silence that carried 10 years of distance, of pride, of longing. And then I heard her cry, a quiet sound at first, like she was afraid to believe it was real. That's when my heart broke and began to heal, all in the same moment. When I was a child, my world was small, just our house, our street, and my mother's voice. We lived in a modest home at the edge of town, with a small garden where she grew jasmine and mint. Every morning, the air would smell like wet earth and tea leaves. I remember how she'd wake me up gently, brushing my hair away from my face. "It's morning, my girl," she'd whisper, her voice warm like sunlight. My mother had the kind of patience that made everything seem easier. She never raised her voice. Even when she was tired, she smiled. There was something about her smile. It always felt like safety. My father worked long hours as a mechanic, and though he was quiet, his hands were kind. We didn't have much, but I never felt poor. My mother had a way of turning even ordinary days into something beautiful. On weekends, she'd take me to the market. We'd walk hand in hand, her sari brushing against my arm, her bangles jingling softly as she picked vegetables. She'd talk to everyone, from the shopkeepers to the stray cats that followed us home. She had a warmth that drew people in, and I always thought she'd never change. But people do. Or maybe it was me who changed first. When I grew older, I began to see things differently. I wanted more. More than the quiet rhythm of our small town. More than the life my parents had built. I remember watching movies set in big cities and thinking, that's where I belong. My mother used to say, the heart doesn't always need big things, just honest ones. I'd smile and nod, but inside, I wanted to prove her wrong. When I turned 18, I got accepted into a college in the city. It was everything I'd dreamed of. Bright lights, tall buildings, endless noise. My mother was proud, though I could see the fear in her eyes when she hugged me goodbye. She had never left our town before. For her, the world beyond was a mystery. For me, it was freedom. At first, I called home often. She'd ask about my classes, my friends, whether I was eating enough. Her voice was always cheerful, but I could hear the loneliness in it. She'd tell me about the new plants in her garden, or how father had hurt his hand at work, or how she missed my laughter echoing through the kitchen. I'd smile, promise to visit soon, and hang up. But soon became maybe next month, and then maybe next year. Life in the city was fast, loud, and intoxicating. I wanted to keep up. I wanted to belong. I found a job after college, and that job became my world. Deadlines replaced dinners, colleagues replaced friends, and the phone that once connected me to home became just another object on my desk. My mother kept calling, of course. At first every week, then every 2 weeks, then once a month. Sometimes I'd answer. More often I didn't. I told myself I was too busy. But the truth was, every call made me feel guilty, and I didn't know how to face that. Whenever I did talk to her, she never complained. She'd just ask softly, "Are you okay, my girl?" And I'd say yes, even when I wasn't. Because how could I tell her that in all the noise and excitement I'd chased after, I'd somehow lost myself? Then one day I stopped calling altogether. There was no big fight, no argument, just silence. Maybe it was pride, maybe it was fear, or maybe it was that I didn't know how to return to the person I once was, the girl who belonged to her mother's world. Months turned into years. I moved apartments, changed jobs, made friends who didn't know anything about where I came from. Sometimes late at night I'd think of her. I'd imagine her sitting by the phone waiting for it to ring. And I'd tell myself, I'll call tomorrow. But tomorrow always came too late. I still remember one birthday. I must have been 27. That morning I opened my email and found a message from an unknown address. It was from my mother. She'd finally learned how to use email, probably with someone's help at the library. The message was simple. "Happy birthday, my girl. Wherever you are, I hope you are smiling today. I pray for you every morning. Love, Amma." I didn't reply, not because I didn't want to, but because I didn't know what to say after so long. How do you begin again after years of silence? How do you explain a distance that you built yourself? After that, the messages stopped too. And so the years kept moving, quietly, relentlessly. I filled my days with work, promotions, apartment leases, social gatherings. But in the quiet moments, the spaces between achievements, her voice would echo in my mind. That gentle, loving tone saying, "Are you okay, my girl?" And every time I remembered it, something inside me ached. Because deep down, I knew she wasn't asking about my job or my health. She was asking about my heart. It's strange how you can walk so far away from someone who loved you so completely, and not even realize what you're losing until it's almost gone. Time has a way of softening pain, but it also hardens distance. 10 years sounds long when you say it out loud, but when you live it, one day after another, it slips by quietly. You stop noticing the birthdays you didn't call for, the holidays you didn't visit, the messages you didn't answer. The guilt becomes something you live with, like a dull ache in the chest you've learned to ignore. That's how I lived, in the quiet company of my own avoidance. At first, I thought I was doing fine. I had a steady job at a design firm. My apartment was small but neat. I had routines: morning coffee, the 8:15 train, work until late, dinner in silence. I convinced myself that this was independence, that this was the life I had wanted when I left home. But as the years went by, something started to feel wrong. The city lights, once so exciting, began to feel harsh. Conversations with friends felt shallow, like everyone was performing happiness, but no one really felt it. I'd scroll through pictures of families celebrating festivals and quietly skip past them, pretending I didn't care. But every time, something inside me stirred, like a faint echo from another life. One evening, I came home after a long day. The rain was falling hard, just like it did the night I left for the city years ago. As I stood by the window, I saw my reflection. Tired eyes, cold expression. I didn't recognize myself. For some reason, I thought of my mother. I imagined her older now, her hair grayer, her hands slower, her laughter quieter. I wondered if she still waited for me, if she still prayed for me, and the thought was almost too heavy to hold. But instead of calling her, I poured myself a cup of tea and told myself I'd do it tomorrow. Always tomorrow. A few months later, my father passed away. I didn't find out until weeks later, from a distant cousin who managed to track me down through a friend on social media. When she said the words, I froze. It didn't feel real. "Your father died," she said softly. It was sudden. A heart attack. I sat on my bed, staring at the floor. My chest felt hollow. My father, the man who used to sit quietly at the kitchen table fixing broken radios, who barely spoke but always smiled when he saw me, was gone. And I hadn't even called. Not once in years. I remember asking, almost whispering, "How's my mother?" "She's not doing well," the cousin said. "She doesn't talk much. She just sits on the porch every evening." That night, I cried for the first time in years, but even through the tears, I didn't call her. I couldn't. How do you call someone after 10 years? And after missing the moment they needed you most? The days after that felt strange. I went to work, smiled when expected, laughed at the right times, but everything inside me felt disconnected. Every sound, a ringing phone, a passing conversation, reminded me of what I'd done. I tried writing her a letter once. I started with "Dear Amma" and stared at the page for hours. How could I explain 10 years of silence in one letter? How could I say, "I'm sorry I wasn't there when Appa died"? The words refused to come. So I tore the paper, threw it away, and went back to pretending. But pretending doesn't last forever. Loneliness is patient. It waits. It sits quietly in the corner until one day, it stands up and looks you straight in the eye. For me, that day came unexpectedly. It was a Sunday morning. I was at the grocery store, standing in line behind an older woman. She was on the phone, laughing, really laughing, as she said, "Yes, I'll make your favorite curry tonight, and don't be late." Her voice was full of warmth, the kind that fills a room. I watched her pack her groceries and walk away, still smiling, and something in my chest broke. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about her. Not the woman herself, but the sound of her joy, that simple, unguarded love between a mother and child. I realized I hadn't heard that sound in 10 years. I started noticing small things after that. Everywhere I went, I saw mothers and daughters, laughing in cafes, walking arm in arm, arguing softly in grocery aisles. And every time I looked away too quickly, it was like the world was quietly reminding me of what I'd lost and what I'd chosen to lose. Work began to feel meaningless. The promotions didn't make me proud anymore. My apartment, once my little sanctuary, began to feel like a cage. I'd lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling, and the silence would get louder. That's the thing about silence. It doesn't stay empty. It fills itself with memories, with regret, with every word you never said. Sometimes I'd hear her in my dreams, her voice calling my name the way she used to, soft, patient, full of love. I'd wake up crying, whispering "Amma" into the dark. Then one day I got sick. Nothing serious, just the flu, but I was alone. No one called to check on me. No one came over. As I sat in bed, feverish and weak, I thought of how my mother used to care for me, how she'd place a wet cloth on my forehead, hum quietly, and make hot soup that tasted like comfort itself. That memory felt so close, I could almost smell it. And suddenly, I wanted nothing more than to go home. But I didn't, because guilt is heavy, and pride even heavier. I told myself I'd already caused her enough pain, that calling her now would just open old wounds, that maybe she'd moved on, learned to live without me. I didn't realize then that parents never really move on. They just learn to wait differently. As months turned to years, I started to change in quiet ways. I stopped running after new things. I found myself sitting by the window more, watching the sky change colors, listening to rain, feeling the pull of something I'd buried long ago. Every once in a while, I'd open my phone and scroll to her name, Amma. I'd hover over it, thumb trembling. But I'd lock the screen again and whisper, "Not tonight." Until one night, the night this story began, I couldn't say "not tonight" anymore. The rain fell harder than I'd heard in years. The world outside my apartment felt blurred, like it was holding its breath. And in that stillness, I heard her voice. Not from memory, not from guilt, but from somewhere deep inside me. It said, "Call me my girl," just like she used to, and this time, I did. When I heard my mother's voice that night, something inside me cracked open. It wasn't just emotion, and it was memory. Every word she said carried the weight of all the years we hadn't spoken. All the silence that had stretched between us like a river I'd been too afraid to cross. "Hello?" she said again. I could hear the tremor in her voice, like she was bracing herself for disappointment. "Amma," I whispered. My voice shook. "It's me." There was a pause. And then, a sound I will never forget, her soft, broken sob. "My girl," she said, her words trembling. "Is it really you?" I closed my eyes, letting the tears come. "Yes, Amma, it's me." She didn't ask why I hadn't called. She didn't ask where I'd been. She didn't scold or question or accuse. She just kept saying my name, over and over, like she was trying to make sure it was real. For a moment, neither of us spoke. We just breathed. Two people trying to remember how to be mother and daughter again. Then she said softly, "I thought I'd never hear your voice again. I wanted to say 100 things. I'm sorry. I missed you. I thought of you every day." But the words felt too small. All I managed was, "I'm sorry, Amma." She didn't answer right away. I could hear the faint sound of her exhaling, steady and slow, like someone trying not to cry too hard. "It's okay," she said finally. "You called? That's enough." Those 4 words hit me like a wave. I'd spent years building walls between us, afraid of what I'd find if I broke them down. But in one sentence, she forgave everything. That night, we talked for hours. She told me about my father, how peaceful his last day had been, how he'd spoken of me often, even near the end. I listened in silence, my throat aching. "He used to say," she whispered, "she'll come back when her heart gets tired." I pressed my hand to my chest. It felt as though he had been waiting all along, not with anger, but with faith. We talked until late. She told me about the house, about the neighbors' children, about the jasmine bush that still bloomed every spring. Her voice was weaker now, but it carried the same warmth I remembered. Before hanging up, she said softly, "Come home, my girl. Whenever you're ready." I promised I would. And for the first time in 10 years, I meant it. The next morning, I woke early. The city outside looked the same. Gray buildings, hurried footsteps, tired faces. But something in me had shifted. For the first time in years, I felt a quiet purpose. I took leave from work. My colleagues looked surprised when I told them I was going home. One of them said, "You, home? I thought you didn't have anyone there anymore." I just smiled faintly. "I do," I said. "I just forgot for a while." Packing was easier than I expected. Clothes, a few gifts, some old photographs I'd kept hidden in a drawer. As I zipped up my suitcase, I noticed one photo I hadn't seen in years. Me as a child, sitting on my mother's lap, both of us laughing. It made me cry again, but this time the tears felt lighter. The train ride home was long. The landscapes changed slowly, from the gray blur of the city to open fields, small stations, and familiar skies. Each passing town felt like a piece of memory returning to me. I remembered sitting by the window as a child, counting trees, listening to my mother tell stories about clouds and seasons. Now, all I could think was how much of her I had missed. As the train neared my hometown, my heart began to race. Would she still recognize me? Would I recognize her? Would she still smile the same way? I didn't know, but I knew one thing. I was ready to face whatever waited for me. When I stepped off the train, the air smelled different, warmer, softer, full of dust and memory. The small station hadn't changed much. There were the same cracked benches, the same old tea stall, the same sound of distant temple bells, and then, among the small crowd of people waiting for loved ones, I saw her. She was standing near the edge of the platform, wearing a faded shawl, holding a small cloth bag. Her hair was almost completely gray now, pulled back neatly as always. She looked smaller than I remembered, fragile, yet steady. For a moment, I couldn't move. My legs felt heavy, my breath caught in my throat. It felt unreal, like seeing a dream in daylight. Then she turned and saw me. Her eyes widened, and for a second she just stared. Then her lips trembled into the smallest, softest smile. "My girl," she whispered, barely loud enough for me to hear. I dropped my bag and walked toward her. The first few steps were slow, uncertain, but then I was running. Really running, like the child I once was. When I reached her, I didn't say a word. I just fell into her arms. She held me tight, tighter than I thought she could. And for the first time in 10 years, I felt completely at home. Neither of us spoke. There were no speeches, no explanations. Just two people holding each other, letting the years of distance melt away in silence. Her hands were thinner now, her grip softer, but her warmth was the same. She stroked my hair like she used to, whispering, "You came home." I nodded against her shoulder, tears soaking into her shawl. "I'm sorry, Amma." She pulled back just enough to look at me. Her eyes were wet, but her smile was gentle. "You came home," she repeated. "That's enough." We walked back together, slowly, quietly, through the familiar streets. Neighbors peeked out from their porches, whispering to each other. Some waved, surprised, but we didn't stop to talk. It felt like the world had faded, and only the two of us remained. When we reached the house, I froze. It looked smaller now, the paint peeling, the old swing rusted, but it still had that same smell, a mixture of earth, soap, and jasmine. Inside, everything was where I remembered it. The old wooden table, the shelf of photographs, the prayer lamp near the window. My father's chair sat empty but polished, as if she still took care of it. I touched the back of it gently. "I'm sorry, Appa," I whispered. "I should have come sooner." My mother watched me quietly, her hands folded. Then she said, "He would have been happy you came home." When I went to bed, I lay awake for a long time, listening to the sound of crickets outside, the rustle of her sari as she moved about. It was like being a child again, safe, cared for, understood without words. The next morning, I woke early. The sunlight streamed through the window, painting the floor in gold. My mother was already in the kitchen, humming softly as she cooked. That sound, the one I'd missed most, filled the whole house. I walked in quietly and hugged her from behind. She laughed, startled, and said, "You used to do that when you were little." I smiled. "Some things don't change." She turned, cupped my face in her hands, and said, "You've changed, my girl. You've grown, but your heart's the same." I wanted to tell her everything, the guilt, the loneliness, the fear, but she didn't need to hear it. She already knew. Parents always do. That day, as we sat together in the garden, I noticed the jasmine bush she'd once planted when I was small. It was still there, full of white flowers, their scent drifting in the warm air. She plucked one and tucked it behind my ear, just like she used to. "You remember this?" she asked. I nodded. "I remember everything now." She smiled, a small knowing smile, and looked at the sky. "Then you're home," she said softly. And she was right. I was finally home. The first few days back home felt like walking through an old dream. Every corner of the house seemed to hold a memory. The old clay water pot by the door, the ticking wall clock that never quite kept time, the faded curtains that my mother refused to replace because they still have life in them. Everything was familiar, yet softened, like the edges of a memory that time had blurred but not erased. My mother moved about the house with quiet grace, her pace slower than I remembered, but her spirit unchanged. She didn't speak much about the years I was gone. Instead, she spoke about what was right in front of us: the garden, the neighbors, the sparrows that had built a nest near the kitchen window. And I understood. Some things don't need to be spoken to be forgiven. We fell into a rhythm, like we had never really been apart. In the mornings, she'd make tea, strong, with too much sugar, and I'd sit across from her at the small wooden table. We didn't rush our conversations. We talked slowly, letting the silence between words feel comfortable again. One morning, I asked her, Did you ever stop waiting for me?" She looked up, surprised, and smiled faintly. "A mother never stops waiting," she said, "even if the waiting becomes quiet." I nodded, unable to speak. There were so many things I wanted to ask. How she spent those years, whether she was angry, whether she'd ever given up on me. But I didn't, because the answer was there, in her eyes. She hadn't stopped loving me. She just learned to love me from afar. That realization changed something inside me. All the guilt I'd carried began to loosen. It didn't vanish overnight. Guilt never does. But it began to soften, replaced by gratitude. In the afternoons, we'd sit together in the courtyard. She'd shell peas or fold laundry while I read aloud from the old books I found on her shelf. Sometimes we didn't talk at all. We just shared the quiet. It was the kind of silence that felt alive, filled with peace, not distance. One day, I found her sitting by my father's chair, tracing the wooden armrest with her fingers. I sat beside her. "You miss him?" I said quietly. She nodded, smiling through the sadness. "Every day, but I talk to him, in my prayers, in the garden, sometimes when I'm cooking. It helps." I watched her for a moment, the way her face softened when she spoke of him. And then, almost without thinking, I said, "I'm sorry I wasn't here when he left." She turned to me, eyes full of understanding. "You were where you needed to be," she said softly. "Sometimes life pulls us apart so we can learn what truly holds us together." Her words stayed with me long after that day. That evening, she brought out an old photo album I hadn't seen in years. The pages were yellowed, the corners curled. We went through them slowly. Birthdays, picnics, school events, even the day I left for college. When we reached that photo, I froze. It was the one taken right before I boarded the bus. My mother's smile was bright, but her eyes looked like they were holding back tears. I stared at it for a long time. "I thought you'd be happier if I left," I said quietly. She looked at me, puzzled. "I thought I needed to go far away to make something of myself. To prove I could be more," she smiled gently. "You didn't need to prove anything to me, my girl. I just wanted you to be happy." Her voice cracked slightly, and she reached out, holding my hand. "I prayed every night that you were safe." That was enough for me. I couldn't hold back my tears anymore. "Amma, I don't deserve you." She laughed softly, wiping my cheeks with her thumb. "Don't say that. You're my child. You don't earn love. You just come home to it." And in that moment, I understood what forgiveness truly meant. It wasn't about forgetting the pain, or pretending the years hadn't happened. It was about love that endured, even when everything else fell silent. The following days were filled with small, tender moments that stitched us back together. I cooked for her one evening badly. The curry was too salty, the rice half burned, but she ate every bite, smiling. "This tastes like your first attempt in school," she teased. "You cried when it didn't turn out right." I laughed, remembering that day vividly, and for the first time in a long while, I felt light. Sometimes I'd catch her looking at me with quiet wonder, as if she still couldn't believe I was really there, and each time, I'd smile back, silently promising her I wouldn't disappear again. We visited my father's resting place together one morning. It was peaceful, surrounded by trees, birds singing softly. She placed fresh flowers and whispered a prayer. I stood beside her, my heart heavy and full at the same time. "I'm home, Appa," I whispered. I came back. A soft breeze passed through the trees just then, and for a moment, I felt something. Not seen, but felt. Like an answer. Maybe it was just the wind, or maybe it was him. As weeks went by, I started to see my mother not just as Amma, but as a woman, one who had lived, lost, and kept loving anyway. She'd aged, yes, but there was a strength in her stillness, a quiet dignity in how she'd faced loneliness and found peace. One afternoon I asked her, "How did you do it? How did you live without me all these years?" She smiled faintly. "I didn't live without you. I just lived with your memory. Every morning I'd make 2 cups of tea, one for me, one for you. I'd sit by the window and imagine you were there, telling me about your day. That's how I kept going. Her words cut through me, not sharply, but deeply. I realized then that even in her solitude, she'd made space for me. And I'd spent all those years trying to escape her love, not realizing it had never left me. That night, as I lay in my old bed, I thought about the strange way life circles back, how the roads we take, no matter how far they lead, somehow bring us home again. I fell asleep to the sound of rain on the roof, just like when I was a child. And for the first time in a decade, I slept peacefully. Days turned into weeks, and soon I had to think about returning to the city. My leave was ending, and though a part of me dreaded it, I knew I couldn't stay forever. But this time it felt different. I wasn't running away. I was leaving with love, not guilt. On my last morning, as I packed, my mother came into my room holding a small box. "This is for you," she said. Inside was a silver anklet, old, simple, worn smooth with time. "It was yours when you were a baby," she said. "You lost one of them years ago, but I kept this." I held it carefully, the metal cool in my palm. "Why didn't you ever send it to me?" I asked. She smiled softly. "Because I knew you'd come back for it one day." I hugged her again, tighter than ever. "Thank you, Amma," I whispered, "for waiting." She kissed my forehead, her voice trembling. "Go live your life, my girl. Just don't forget you have a home to return to." On the train ride back to the city, I watched the countryside pass by, the fields, the houses, the rivers. It all felt different now, not like a place I'd escaped from, but like a part of me I'd found again. When I reached my apartment, the silence didn't feel empty anymore. I placed the anklet on my bedside table, and that night I called her again, just to say goodnight. She laughed softly on the phone. "You'll make a habit of this now?" "Yes," I said, smiling. "Every night if you'll let me." "Then I'll wait for your call," she said. And I knew she meant it. It's been months since I went back home. But even now, every night before I fall asleep, I think of that evening, the night I finally called my mother after 10 silent years. It still amazes me how something so small, just one phone call, can change everything. It didn't erase the past. It didn't make the pain vanish, but it opened a door that had been closed for far too long. Sometimes I still hear her voice in my mind. "Come home, my girl." It's strange how those 3 words used to scare me, and now they feel like peace. Since that day, my life has slowed down in the best possible way. I still work, still live in the city, still chase deadlines, but there's a softness to it now, because I know there's someone, somewhere waiting for my call, and that makes every day feel lighter. On weekends, I visit her. I bring groceries, help her with the garden, sit beside her as she tells stories I've already heard 100 times. Sometimes she forgets small things, like where she put her glasses, and we both laugh about it. She always insists on cooking, even when I tell her I'll take care of it. She says, "Let me, my girl. Feeding you is how I remember who I am." And I let her. Because I understand now, it isn't about the food. It's about love, the kind that doesn't need grand gestures or perfect words. The kind that lives quietly in the small things. In a cup of tea, a folded blanket, a call that says I'm thinking of you. There are still nights when I think about those lost years, all the birthdays missed, the laughter we didn't share, the words we never said, and sometimes it still hurts. But now, instead of guilt, I feel gratitude for the chance to begin again. Not everyone gets that chance. Forgiveness, I've learned, isn't a single moment. It's a choice you keep making. Every day, every conversation, every heartbeat. My mother never asked for an apology. She gave me something far greater, her acceptance. And in that acceptance, I found my peace. I often think about my father, too. About what he said. That I'd come home when my heart grew tired. He was right. But maybe coming home isn't about a place. Maybe it's about a person. Maybe home is simply the voice that still calls your name, even after 10 years of silence. Sometimes I sit by the window, just like she used to, and I make 2 cups of tea. One for me, one for her. It's my way of saying thank you. For the patience, for the love, for not giving up on me when I didn't deserve it. I've realized something simple but profound. Love doesn't fade when we walk away. It waits. It waits quietly, without anger, without noise. And when we finally turn around, it's still there, smiling softly, saying, "You came home." If I could speak to that younger version of myself, the one who left home so sure of what she wanted, I'd tell her this: you don't need to go far to find yourself. You just need to remember where you came from, because the heart always knows the way back, even after 10 years, even after silence. The night I called my mother, I thought I was reaching out to her, but now I know it was her love that reached out first. It had been calling to me all along, softly, patiently, until I was ready to listen. And when I finally did, I found what I'd been searching for all my life. Not success, not independence, not freedom, but peace. Peace in her voice. Peace in forgiveness. Peace in coming home. Are you okay, my girl? Yes, Amma. Now I am.